All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine, and I'm one of the librarians here at Portage District Library. It is my honor to welcome you to our Michigan Author Talk with Heidi McCrary. Tonight, Heidi will be talking about her debut novel, Chasing North Star. Now, there are certain books that stay with you after the final page. Chasing North Star was one of those books for me. The honest emotions and gorgeous prose captivated my heart and mind for weeks after I finished the book. I hope they do the same for you. But enough about me and my reading journey. Allow me to introduce our special guest author, Heidi McCrary. Heidi is the youngest of 5 children and lives with her husband John in Kalamazoo, Michigan, just a short drive from Alamo where she grew up. She now owns the family woods that are depicted in the book, where her children have been known to use as a place to get away from their own mother and father. Her 2 sons are doing great despite being raised by a mother with no formal training. Embracing all that West Michigan has to offer, Heidi can often be found hanging with her family in Kalamazoo and the many unique towns along the Lake Michigan shoreline, or on a local golf course working on her goal of becoming a mediocre golfer. Heidi has worked in the media world all her adult life, many years with the West Michigan CBS television affiliate, and currently in the advertising industry. She is also a contributing writer for a regional women's magazine. Chasing North Star is Heidi's first novel, but I hope it won't be her last. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome to Portage District Library.
Thank you, you guys. Thank you so much for coming out, because I know you all woke up this morning and you went, that author thing's today. Do I really want to go? You know, and I understand, because I woke up this morning and I went, that author thing's today. Do I really want to go? So thank you for being here. Most of you probably know that Chasing North Star, I'm the author, and these 2 characters are my sisters, and they're also characters in the book. So I brought them with you just because they're more entertaining than I am. Most of the book takes place in Alamo, Michigan, which I don't know if you're all familiar with Alamo. It's about 8 miles north of Kalamazoo. Anyone here grew up in Alamo? Any Alamonians? All right, we got a couple, we got a few. It's pretty much a stop in the road. It's a place that you go through to get to Timber Ridge Ski Resort or Bittersweet. The most famous thing there right now is Fricano's restaurant. If you haven't been there, it's a great restaurant. One thing that, one of the most popular places that used to be in Alamo was called the Alamo Creamery. And in the 1800s? Late 1800s, the Alamo Creamery was the largest employer in Alamo, Michigan. It employed about 100 people, and it was owned by our grandparents. And the Alamo Creamery turned into what was, when we were growing up, it was simply our barn. And we didn't know that it used to be the largest employer in Alamo, but to us kids, it was just our barn. Chasing North Star is a novel that I wrote a couple of years ago. It took me about 7 years to write, and again, it was off and on. You know, I kept writing it and putting it aside, picking it back up, and I kept thinking I'm onto something. And one of the reasons why I wrote Chasing North Star is because Hannah and I used to belong to a book club. And at that point, we read The Glass Castle, and I don't know if any of you, nothing more entertaining than dysfunctional families, right? And we read the book, and you know, I loved the book. Jeanette Walls, what a wonderful writer, and she grew up with parents that were very colorful. And as we read the book and as we were discussing the book, Hannah and I kept saying, you know, let us tell you about our mother. And the women in the book club were so entertained by our stories that we knew that we were on to something. And so I wrote Chasing North Star. It started out as a memoir, and my sisters and my brothers were significantly older than me. There's a big gap between me and the rest of the siblings. And so my mother suffered from a cocktail of illnesses. And back in the late 50s and the early 60s, medicine hadn't caught up yet in regards to treating properly epilepsy and treating bipolar and treating schizophrenia. And she was a lot worse back then. And by the time I came along, and by the time I was older, my mother was more properly medicated, and so she did lead a better life later on. But when our mother was a young mother, life was rough. Life was rough for her, and life was rough for more of my siblings. I don't know if you ever saw, I think it was called The Piano. There's a movie about Germany and about a father who has a little boy and he pretends like it's all a game so that his son isn't scared. And to a lesser extent, my siblings did that because I was never afraid most of the time. There were times when our mother, she had a fondness for butcher knives. And she would run after us with a butcher knife, and we would run, and we had a large yard, and we had pine trees and stuff, and we'd dive under trees and stuff, hiding from our mother. And while these guys were probably petrified, I thought it was a game. So I have these guys to thank. These guys were my everything.
I'm 8 years older, so I took care of Heidi when she was born, because our mom was sick a lot and she was in bed a lot. And I just, as the oldest daughter, that was what I had to take care of her. And yeah, we did probably shield you quite a bit from our mother's bad days, I guess. And we just kind of helped each other to get through.
And I'd like to also add that when she mentioned the butcher knives, I kind of started to laugh. Well, that was our mechanism to cope with it, okay? And we still do it to this day.
Yeah, we still do.
Running from the butcher knife,
I mean,
or whatever it was that she pulled out.
Yeah, it was just another day in our upbringing.
Another day. So anyway, Chasing North Star started out as a memoir. And because I am significantly younger, I only remembered snapshots of things that happened. And so I was filling in a lot of blanks. And at one point, my editor said, are you writing a memoir or are you writing a novel? And I decided at that point that I was writing a novel. So while Chasing North Star is a novel, I say it is inspired by a true story. Also, the book tackles two different time periods. The main time period is over the course of the year of 1970. And then there's a backstory that takes a look at my mother's own childhood. And while we know very little about our mother's childhood, I filled in a lot of gaps. And so at that point, it's more of a story. And changing my book from a memoir to a novel, it allowed the story to have an arc. It allowed it to have a start and a finish. So I was real happy to do that, to change it from a memoir to a novel. If you don't mind, I'm going to read a section of the book. This is in the wintertime. If you haven't read it, you might enjoy the fact that this book, because it takes place in Alamo, there's a lot of things that you're going to go, oh yeah, I remember that. And so it's fun to read about places that you visited. For instance, our family, every summer, we went to Tequamanon Falls. That was the place we went to, and we'd go there for a couple of weeks. We became such regulars that the rangers and the guy that runs the store, they all knew us. So, the Tequamanon Falls was one of those things that we did all the time. There's another section in here about when the rest area was brand new. And when you're a kid and a rest area goes from pit toilets to fancy restrooms, it's a big deal in Alamo when Alamo gets a rest area, you know?
Big deal, yeah.
I was excited when Alamo got a McDonald's, but that's another story. All right, this takes place at Alamo Center, which was the school in our town. There's winter cold when you have to keep your wool hat on to keep your earlobes from freezing and falling off. And then there's Michigan cold, when the snot freezes in your nose every time you inhale, weighing on your lungs like a carton of Camel cigarettes. And this was Michigan cold. With my red plastic sled rolled up and tucked under my arm, I looked up at the parking lot, thinking that at least one brave soul would want to conquer the sledding hill. But the last bus pulled away and I scanned the schoolyard and saw that all the walkers had already skedaddled for home. Sissies. I can't say I blame them. Sylvia thought I was making an unfortunate decision earlier that morning when she saw me grabbing my sled. It was nice of her to voice her concern for me to be outside for any length of time. She had a habit of looking out for me, seeing how much younger I was. I believe her exact words that morning were, "You're not really going out sledding after school, are you? You're such a dunderhead." As I walked across the playground, I realized that perhaps she had a point. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I stomped down with each step, enjoying the loud crack as I crashed through the frozen snow. With not a cloud in sight, the sky was a brilliant blue. Unfortunately, as I learned from our father, while gray overcast days may not be as pretty, clouds help trap the warmer air. So even though snow that snaps like glass makes for a wonderful backdrop in a Hallmark movie, I was reminded of the downside of the frigid temperatures with each breath. Pulling my scarf over my mouth and nose only resulted in more misery as it quickly slipped back down, making my cheeks burn as the crisp air hit my warmed-up skin. I continued across the schoolyard, lifting my feet with each exaggerated step. It was quiet out, and I sat for a minute at the top of the hill, thinking about the upcoming week. Christmas Eve was only 2 days away, and all holidays brought out an added amount of stress to our mother. The ambulance trips were getting more commonplace, and she had done the gun and knife thing so often that even she was bored with the theatrics. "Hey!" I nearly jumped out of my snow pants at the sound of a voice behind me. Turning my head didn't work because I was then looking into the side of my hood, which I finally pushed back. I was shocked to see Chris, another student in 4th grade, but not in my class. He lives north of town, and I rarely saw him outside of school because his mom chauffeured him everywhere. I envisioned her to be one of those TV moms, the kind who wakes her kids up for school with a hot breakfast and throws a scarf around their necks as they head out the door because she insists that it's colder than they think. Sometimes I would watch as Chris's station wagon pulled up to the school, and his mom would wave at him as he walked into the building. She loved him. You could just see it on her face. "Hi," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. I added, "Cool sled." He was holding a new orange saucer, and he somehow looked even cuter all bundled up in his parka and scarf. "Thanks, it's okay. How's the hill?" "I don't know, I just got here." "You're in Miss Snuber's class, aren't you?" "Yeah, we have recess and gym together." "That's right. You've got the German mom, right?" I nodded, and he looked down the hill. "All right, time to see what this sled can do. Race you to the bottom." After more than a dozen runs, a car horn honked from the direction of the school parking lot. "Shoot," Chris said, out of breath as we reached the top of the hill. "That sure didn't seem like an hour." "That's my mom." He turned towards me and he said, "I gotta go. It's been fun." "Hang on, I'm done sledding too. I'll walk with you." You better not." The car honked again and he looked around, not wanting to look at me. "My mom told me that I'm not allowed to hang with you." His voice softened as he added, "It's not about you. It's something about your mom." He quickly turned away and he started back towards the parking lot. After a few feet, he turned back and he waved at me. "See you at school tomorrow." I started to wave goodbye, but I stopped myself and I stood motionless. The sun was close to setting and a cool blue tint bounced off the icy snow, displaying a magnificent light show. With the sound of a car door slamming, I started my walk across the schoolyard. Sylvia is right, I thought. I am a dunderhead. I tried wiping my tears away with my mitten, which only made my face colder. Dragging my sled behind me, I started to run across the parking lot and down the road. And I kept running, feeling my heart pump with each crash, through the brittle snow. The cold stole my breath, making me want to stop, but I kept running. So that's just a day in the life. And I want to read one more section here before we go back to chatting. As I followed Mickey into the kitchen, we heard it. The quiet, methodical stepping of someone on the stairs. It was mid-afternoon and probably a good time to go play outside because if our mother was... Did I hear the record player? I turned around to find our mother standing in the kitchen doorway. I knew there was no good answer to her question. Yeah, Mickey answered quickly. I played one of my records and I put the lid down and I made sure I turned it off. I should have jumped in to admit that I was the one who touched the record player, but I didn't. Sit down, Mickey. Mickey took a seat at the picnic table. His eyes twitched as he watched our mother dig through the kitchen drawer. She smiled, apparently having found what she was looking for, and she pulled out the butcher knife, presenting it like a new necklace she had just purchased at Gilmore's department store. She gazed lovingly at the knife for a few moments before gliding over to my brother, moving to the beat of a dramatic soundtrack that only she could hear. Stopping in front of my brother, she leaned forward and she put her mouth next to my brother's ear. I'm here to help you, she whispered. I'm going to dig that nervous twitch out of your eye, fixing you once and for all. Do you hear me? She was right about Mickey being nervous, and no doubt she had managed to pump up the volume of that involuntary twitch by 2 more levels. Mickey looked over to our father, who seemed preoccupied with the day's crossword puzzle, probably wishing that his children would just take it from their mother without talking back and stirring her up. Our father closed the dictionary and he picked up his pencil to write down a word. Meanwhile, I stood over the heating vent, trying to be as still as the air. At that moment, Mickey was probably regretting making that 16-mile bike ride to the Plainwell Sanitarium where he delivered a bouquet of wildflowers to our mother. Beautiful Indian paintbrushes, black-eyed Susans and daisies. Leaving them at the front desk, he was leery that they would actually reach our mother. Turned out she actually did receive them. And for the next few days after returning home from the sanitarium, Mickey was her favorite. But it didn't last long. It never lasted long. For God's sake, Mickey, stop jerking around and sit still, our father warned, apparently having just noticed what was going on 3 feet from him. Our mother twirled the knife in her hand so that the black blade caught the reflection of the afternoon sun streaming in through the kitchen window, and the light splashed across her dark eyes. Closing the dictionary again, our father looked over to our mother, apparently sizing up the situation. Sit still seemed like a weird request to give a kid. Run seemed like better advice to give a kid whose mother was coming at him with a butcher knife. I could hear my heart beating, praying it couldn't be heard from across the room. Perhaps aware of her audience, she brought her face to within inches from Mickey's and slowly raised the knife, and with the tip of the blade, she gently touched his eye. Mickey jumped back, and with a sudden jerk, and before I could yell, "Run, Mickey!" he was up and out the front door. And because I had no desire to see if our mother would look at me for her next form of entertainment, I followed him out the door and down the front steps, where we both stopped to catch our breath while we waited for the door to open again. But the door remained shut. Mickey's eyes darted, scanning his surroundings before he finally exhaled. Hannah and Sylvia were by the barn playing with the bow and arrows, and I relaxed, feeling good about being in the sunshine. But I could see that Mickey was still shaking, like the afternoon breeze was blowing right through him. "Mickey," I asked, "what did Mutti mean when she said she was going to fix you? What does she think is wrong with you?" "I don't know," he answered, and he looked back toward the front door. "Maybe she can't stand the thought that I don't fit the mold she put me in. People don't like it when you don't fit neatly into the category God assigned to you." "What?" He twitched a shudder that started at his neck and made his shoulders shake. Finally, he looked at me and he added, "You're too young. Let's forget about Mutti for a while." It was unusually warm that October, a jeans and sweatshirt kind of day, and most people will say that summer is their favorite season, but I'll take a brisk sunny afternoon in autumn any day of the year. The only downside was the occasional arrow that insisted on burying itself in a burst of red, yellow, and orange leaves that had taken off. Picking up another arrow, Hannah loaded, aimed, and nearly hit a bullseye on our makeshift target. Arrows would pierce through the front of the cardboard box only to be caught by the back. My job was to chase down the arrows that missed their mark. It was the price I paid for getting to shoot Hana's arrows on occasion, and a chore I would have found more enjoyable without the added challenge of Doxy running alongside me, biting at my ankles. Damn dog. Picking up a fallen arrow, I ran my fingers across the vivid yellow and pink feathers on the end of the shaft. And as I returned with the arrow, Hana handed the bow to Mickey. And as he stepped up, as though he was ready to shoot the target, he instead aimed straight up into the sky and pulled the string back. "Run!" he shouted before shooting off the arrow. This was our cue to run for our lives. Taking off, I tripped on something round, catapulting me and sending me face first into the grass. Damn walnuts. While bow and arrow dodgeball probably wasn't our most brilliant idea, it did kill time on a lazy afternoon. "You are such a jackass," Hana called out to Mickey as she tried to catch her breath. The reason I end there, and we actually did do that, shoot arrows straight up into the air and then run. None of us died. The reason I ended there is the sentence, Hana calls Mickey a jackass. And we went through a lot of editing processes during this book. And today, authors are very aware that we need to be cognizant of being aware of cultural differences and political correctness. And the editor flagged, I originally had Hana calling Mickey an idiot, which I thought was less offensive. And the editor flagged it and said that that would be offensive to those with mental issues. And so I changed it to jackass, which I find much more offensive, frankly. But apparently I didn't offend jackasses anywhere, the animals. So when I started writing this book, it was called Chasing Crazy. Because most of this takes place in 1970, and people talked different in 1970. And I wanted the dialogue to be authentic. And again, when the editors went through this and they went, it's called the sensitivity read, and they flagged words that might be red flags. At one point I had Indian summer, and you don't say that anymore. But in 1970 we did, but I got rid of that and I just said autumn. But there were some words that I left alone, and I made a decision that when I'm talking narrative, I was more cognizant of being aware of the words I was using. But when it came to dialogue, I gave myself a little bit more breathing room because people talked differently in 1970, and I wanted the verbiage to be authentic.
Especially in Alamo, we did.
Especially in Alamo. Yeah. So we used the word crazy a lot back then. But we changed it from Chasing Crazy to Chasing North Star. And the reason I changed it to North Star, it has kind of a double meaning. There's a train that plays a role in this book because we lived along the railroad tracks, and what you guys may know it now as the Calhaven Trail. But in our days, it was the railroad tracks that ran through Alamo. And there actually was, but this was before we were born, there was an Alamo Depot. And you can still see the foundation, and it's still there, the foundation in the weeds of the Alamo Depot in Alamo.
How many of you have read the book? I'm curious. A lot of people have.
Wonderful. You know, I want to back up a little bit and say that the reason why I brought my sisters here, not only because they are part of the book, but we also want to make this, I want you to feel free to ask questions along the way. I mean, we will take questions after, but as we're chatting, if you have a question or just something you want to interject, please do. I'd love for this to be a conversation and not just me talking at you. All right, what do we got?
Since you covered that subject,
Yeah.
there's a reference here to join the conversation. Has anybody contacted you by those email addresses or anything, or Facebook or anything to
I do,
ask
thank you.
questions?
Thank you for asking. I do have, and I'm really bad at this. I am bad at promoting myself. I do have an author page on Facebook. It's Heidi McCrary. I think it's Heidi McCrary Author. And if you just search in Facebook, I'll pop up. And I would love for you to follow me. And I do get questions. So, you know, and you can ask questions there. I'm also on Twitter, which I barely use, and Instagram. But on Facebook, yeah, please do. Please follow me on Facebook. Or if you have a question, I'll be glad to answer it. Yes?
So we know that you're Heidi and Hannah, and who is your other sister?
Sylvia.
Oh, I didn't actually say their names, did I?
No, we were just sisters.
This is Johanna. She's the oldest sister. She goes by Hannah in the book. And we grew up calling her Hannah, but her full name is Johanna. And this is Sylvia Solomka. She goes by Sylvia in the book. And we do have, and then there's Mickey, Michael. And Mickey today lives in, we all live in the area, and we're all still very close, as you can see. They won't leave me alone. Michael is, he did move away as fast as he could, and I don't blame him. Mickey took the brunt of our mother's anger, and he was often the target, and he had a very rough childhood. And I don't blame him. He moved away as fast as he could. You know what all of us did? As soon as we were 18, we were out of the house.
Out of the house.
Out. Which I said, thanks a lot when you guys left way
We
earlier
abandoned
than
her.
I did. He's in Seattle now and doing very well. And we have a fifth brother. He's not in the book. And it's not that we love our fifth brother. During the editing process, I had 5 siblings in the beginning of the story, and my editor suggested that I lose a brother, that I had too many kids, and so I erased Fred.
Too many to keep track of.
Too many to keep track of. And I do apologize him at the beginning of the book. I apologize to Fred that he's not in the book.
Is Fred local?
He now lives in Florida. We're the only ones that stayed put.
Well, I moved to Cincinnati for 11 years, and I came back.
Just can't get enough.
She couldn't get enough of us. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read one more selection, because this one's, and I should say, not all of our lives was dark and horrible. My mother suffered bipolar. She was bipolar. And as you know, with every deep, deep, deep low, there's a high. And so sometimes she could be damn entertaining, and we had a great time when she was on that up curve. So we actually, we had some really fun times too. But I'm going to read one more selection here, and this one's this is more light, just so you know. Check, 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 check. The stagehand spoke into the microphone, looking out into the audience to some invisible source who apparently wasn't happy with the sound level. Check. Mary had a little lamb. Check, check. As we made our way through the rows of folding chairs on the dirt track, many other families also scrambled for the best view of the stage. And I should say, I didn't introduce this. We're at the Allegan County Fair. Settling into our seats, 3 rows from the very back, I strained my neck, watching as more stagehands adjusted lights before setting up the stage, with 3 bar stools and a matching number of microphone stands. Oh man, this is going to be good. In answer to the setting sun, the lights turned on, illuminating the fairgrounds and building the anticipation of the crowd. Finally, another stagehand walked into the center of the stage, and he tapped the microphone, leaning into it and saying, "Are you all ready for a little fun tonight?" He was answered with a thunderous applause and cheers, and as I stood up on my chair, trying to see who it was everyone was cheering for, all I saw was a million backsides. As the 3 Stooges were introduced, they entered on stage, bringing everyone to their feet and leaving me, again, with a view of a million backsides. The 3 stars turned on the hilarity as everyone around me laughed at the hijinks exploding on stage. Meanwhile, I watched child after child leave their seats to run up to the area directly in front of the stage. My father must have noticed them as well, because when I turned to look at him, he was smiling at me and nodding his head. Not wasting a second, I jumped from my seat and I ran down the aisle to join the multitude of other children who were already enjoying the show from the front row. And there they were, so close that I could see the stain on Moe's suit jacket and a previously lit cigar sticking out of Larry's pocket. In an attempt to get the best view possible, I climbed up onto the snow fence that separated us from the stage, and I hung on, mesmerized, as I witnessed the Stooges' comic genius blasting before my eyes. 2 short hours later, the trio waved goodnight, and as the crowd cheered, I ran back to my family to share the incredible news that had happened to me while I was watching the Three Stooges up close and personal. "He talked to me! Larry talked to me!" I shouted to my family. "Really?" my father replied, surprised that one of them had actually spoken directly with his youngest. "And what did he say?" "He said, 'Get off the fence!'" For some reason, my father couldn't stop laughing, and I laughed with him, because this just might have been the coolest night of my life. And it was.
It still is?
It still
Is
is.
it still, Heidi?
It's still the highlight of my life.
Growing up in Alamo, there wasn't a lot of entertainment back in the 1970s and 60s, and going to the Allegan Fair was like a big deal. It was always like a week after school started, I think. And my dad would pile us all into the Rambler, and we'd take off for Allegan, and it was just a night that we could run wild and do fun things, and it was good times. It was good times for all of us.
But you know what? We always ran wild.
We did. We were around Alamo. We would get on our bike. I mean, we were like free-range kids back then. It was a different time, and part of it was, I think, just to escape from the drama in the house. We would just get on our bikes first thing in the morning, and we would be gone all day long, bike riding. And we would drive along Owen Drive and pick up beer bottles and pop bottles to get money, to go to the gas station. It was just simple things like that. And it was our childhoods. It wasn't all bad. There were a lot of good times too. And we survived by keeping together, by talking with each other. And and that's what we still do when we became adults. And we thought we were the only people in town that had a rough childhood. We were always jealous. Everybody else, you'd walk by their house, and you think they're like people on television. They're all happy and they have no cares in the world. And it's not until you grow up and become an adult and talk to other people, and you find out we weren't the only wacky family in town. So-and-so's, they had alcoholism in their family. They had abuse in their family. When we got older, we discovered that other people had problems too, and that made you feel not so alone. We weren't the only weird family in town. And that's kind of also why Heidi wrote this book. And also, as we got older and we found it was more normal to have issues, we would often sit in, "Oh yeah, remember when that happened? Remember when this?" And we kind of, what's the word I'm thinking of? We bonded and got through we didn't carry that fear with us into our adulthood. We realized our mother had issues. She grew up in Germany during the war. She was given up by her parents. She had a hard life, a rough life in Germany, as many people did during the war. And then when she was a teenager, she developed epilepsy. And back in the 40s and the 50s, they didn't know what modern medicine didn't know how to take care of it. And they put her on some very, very strong drugs back then, very strong. And and that's, we think one reason our mom suffered so greatly was because she was medicated so heavily.
And
And
she also went through electro
she had
shock
electric
therapy
shock therapy, yeah, when she, I
in
remember.
Detroit.
In Detroit, my parents, they took us camping. We always went camping. We couldn't afford hotels, so we just camped everywhere. And we thought it was a camping trip to the Detroit area, but then we found out later that during the day, my parents were gone all day, and my father took her for electric shock therapy at the hospital. Our mom, and there were several times, and she suffered greatly from depression, and the epilepsy just exasperated it. She was so ashamed of having epilepsy. She was,
She hid from the world and
yeah, she didn't make friends easily because she just felt so alone and so ashamed of everything that had gone on in her life. And you know, some days she would just wake up on the wrong side of bed, and she would come downstairs, and the day would just go bad from there. But then, and then she'd be in bed for days, just days. She'd be in bed, and go ahead.
Was she ever hospitalized?
Pardon?
Was she ever hospitalized?
many times.
Many times, yeah. She was in and out of the Plainwell Sanitarium. I don't know if any of you know that area at all, but there was a sanitarium in Plainwell right by the Kalamazoo River, and several times she would she'd overdose on her pills. Again, the epilepsy pills were very strong, and she was supposed to take them, you know, like every day at certain times of the day, and she would overdose. She'd try to kill herself. And Heidi was very young, but we knew what was
Oh, I
going on.
remember.
And,
Barbital?
pardon?
Was it
Phenobarbital and
That was one of them, yeah.
Dilantin?
I can't remember. We used to know
It
have
was,
them.
it was both of those.
But, and my father would, you know, when she overdosed, he would call the ambulance, and we'd be so embarrassed when the ambulance pulled up in front of our house in Alamo. Oh my God. But, you know, and they'd come with the bed,
The gurney and
the gurney, and they'd load her on the gurney, and they'd take her away. And she would then be in the Plainwell Sanitarium for several weeks at a time. And they would try to give her therapy. They
I'm
just
sure
try
they
to help
just
her.
drug her up too. And
Well,
that's hard because,
Yeah.
you know, I know of other people that have the same issues and they go off of it because it just makes their mind fuzzy and
Mm-hmm.
they just want to think clearly and so it's a roller coaster.
It is.
Unfortunately, even today,
Yeah.
It's, yep.
people who have mental health issues,
Mm-hmm.
they're treated in a way that when they assert themselves and say, I do not want this medication anymore, it makes me feel not myself.
Not normal, yeah.
They're thought of as being more disturbed, and they're either medicated more, or the ECT treatment is very, very common these days, believe it or
Mhm.
not. So,
Yeah.
one of the questions that I have is how, the three of you or your siblings, how did you deal with your mother's situation when you were teenagers? Because usually, at teenagehood, that's when everything surfaces. You know, you see what's going on, you experience what's going on all along,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're a teenager, you begin to verbalize it,
Yes.
come out with it. Were you able to do that?
It did not go well. But I have, yeah.
Each one of us, because we're different ages, we all did it differently, you know? I was kind of the rebel, became the rebel.
Sylvia was the bad girl.
And I am to this day.
I was the good girl.
Yeah, and she was the motherly type. Yeah, so. We were the rebel. I was.
But not anymore. She turned out to be a very nice woman. But But also if you watch the video, the movie slides, whatever, there were some happy times too. It wasn't, it all depended on how my mother felt that day. There were, like Heidi was saying, some days she'd come out and play with us, and everything was right in the world. And then, for absolutely no reason, she had a bad dream. We don't know what happened. She would just be evil. That's the best way to say it. She'd just be evil. And we would stay out of her way. It's like, okay.
We knew when to just leave.
Yeah. And then that's when we would go to the barn and play. And I remember once, after a particularly crazy day, we talked about running away from home.
I did, and so did Mickey.
Mickey, yeah. But, and we
And
all
so did
thought,
Mickey, yeah.
here we are, small kids, and we're like, well, where will we go? What should we do? I think we ran up to the South Hill or something. I don't know. And my mother also ran away from home quite often. If she thought she was being ignored, wasn't taken care of, and would get in a fight. And our dad was the most patient man in the world. She would be a wildcat and just go crazy, and he would hold her and try to hug her and, come on, Sputzy, calm down, calm down. And it was amazing they found each other. It was a good thing because no one else would put up with that. That's what we always thought, why are you putting up with this? Our mom held a knife to my throat too once. And I can't even remember why she did it. Something happened. She snapped. And it was kind of terrifying. And I remember our dad was sitting right there at the table, and he looked over at me, and he just kind of gave a sad smile, and he said, "Don't worry, Johanna, she won't hurt you." And it was kind of rough, but we made it through.
John?
That was kind of my question all this time. I have not read the book.
You need to.
Spoilers, but I was wondering about your dad. Sounds like your dad was
He was
there
very calm.
and you just said he was patient and loving.
Yes.
And he was always there for you also.
Yes.
Yeah, Joan just asked, for those who didn't hear, she asked about our father, and he was definitely the calming effect on our mother.
He tried.
And this book, it's part love story. I mean, those two loved each other, and you knew they did. I mean, so it was kind of a tragic and sad love story as well. Were you going to say something, Sylvia? No.
Good.
And as I wrote this, I had to understand that this was my story, and that my version of what happened in our childhood is different from Hannah's version, which is different from Sylvia's version. And when I wrote a couple of drafts in, I shared it with my siblings for their input. And Sylvia's smiling because she knows where I'm going with this. And I said, "So what'd you think?" And Sylvia said,
You didn't make her mean enough.
so honest to God, I tried to mean her up a little bit in the book. And then I realized that I was no longer writing my story, and I needed to. And I also, because it is a novel, I thought it was important I wanted the reader to not hate her. I wanted the readers to understand her background, and so I did want to make her sympathetic. And she wasn't a monster. She was someone who
She did the best she could.
She did the best she could. And I don't think any of us have ill will towards her. We all realize, well, you might a little. It's my story, not yours.
We have to laugh about it. We either laugh or cry.
Janine?
So you mentioned the novel, part of it's novel and part of it is memoir. What are the main parts that are more the novel and parts?
Yeah, good question. As I said, this started out as a memoir, and it kind of morphed into a novel, or kind of a hybrid, I should say. And I joke that the parts you think aren't believable, those are the real parts. For the most part, the things that I wrote about 1970, that's all of it's true. The funny stuff, the sad stuff, all of that is true. It didn't necessarily all happen in 1 year. I did that for the sake of the story, but all that stuff happened. The part I embellished was my mother's childhood, just because obviously I know less about it. What was true about my mother is she was abused. She was a war bride. That's how she met our father. She did spend time in an orphanage. What I made up was her best friend.
You embellished.
Thank you. That's a much better word. What I embellished was her best friend Mari. She actually did have a friend, a relative, cousin named Mari, but she's not the girl that I wrote about in the book. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. You did treat your father with quite, I felt, that he was a strong character and was able to keep the family.
I will always look to our father as kind of an Atticus. I keep doing this. I hope I'm not messing up the mic. As sort of an Atticus Finch.
Yeah.
You know, he was.
He was a wise
First of all, he
man.
was very smart, and he was very calming. And
Did you create when your mother saw where she was going to live here, I saw that as a very shattering of dreams.
that's true. She told us how
Oh.
when she came to Alamo.
She was heartbroken.
Yes, okay.
Because, after the war, Germany was a broken country. It was horrible. And everybody, everybody wanted to get out of Germany. And America was a dream. And if a German girl could snag an American soldier, man, they had it made.
They had a one-way ticket.
Yeah. Yep. And not only was our dad he was a sergeant in the Air Force, and he had a car. I mean, he was like hot, And so my mom, and her back then, she thought everything in America was like what they showed on television. Everybody was rich. Everybody had a beautiful house, And she had no idea. And my dad lived in this.
In Alamo.
Yeah. Dad lived, And when she found out she was in Alamo, and not only that, she had to live with my dad's parents in an old farmhouse with a chicken coop. And I mean, that wasn't at all what she expected. And she had a hard time with that. And just leaving Germany and leaving everybody behind, it was rough.
Another concern, you do relate quite a few incidents. Was there ever any of your children that were hurt? Did she ever
Physically?
physically?
Surprisingly, no.
No,
No.
And
well,
from something you said.
there's slaps maybe,
Right,
but
You're right, there were slaps.
yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, as far as injury,
So
we
you
were never.
did have trust in how far she would
And
I would say so.
and we were fast. Out the door. Yeah.
go. You tried, got you through it.
Yep. Got us through.
I find it
You go ahead, then we'll get you.
so interesting, again, generational differences of like back then to even now. And you, in your book or two, it's like it's normal, like your life is a little like normal. Your dad never makes excuses for your mom or apologizes for her. You don't write about her like
No.
anyone saying, oh, I'm so sorry, Sylvia, that shouldn't have happened to you. Like,
Yeah.
it was what it was, but it almost seems like it helped you be resilient. It helped you
Big time.
overcome a very abusive childhood.
Yeah.
These days, CPS would be involved. You would have been
You-
removed from that
absolutely.
home.
Yeah,
Your dad would have been expected to have
Yeah.
safety plans in place and all these things. And you just look at the differences
Yeah.
of, and yet it sounds like y'all came out.
We all survived, and it's a miracle.
You'll have to ask our kids.
Your parents.
Yeah.
And I just find that, I work in mental health, so I'm like, this is like just fascinating
Really?
It was like normalized for you. Oh, mom's acting up, like, yeah, we gotta get out of here. And
Yeah.
and poor Mickey was, yeah, like yeah, the target so much.
Yeah, and sometimes there's guilt because it's not like we were able to stick up for him,
Sure.
you know? So that's,
Well, it sounds like she hit your dad, she hit you. Like, it's
Yeah.
like, oftentimes we picture the dad being abusive, but in your case, it's the mother.
yeah.
I mean, and I just, what a difference it would be between now and back then.
Yeah, and our mother was the most insecure person I've ever met. She just felt, she always felt so insignificant. She was ashamed. She was embarrassed. Anytime someone would knock on our door, our mom would go hide in the closet.
That's right, she
And yeah, she didn't want to face anyone. And it's like she was her own worst enemy. And I remember my dad, just shaking her and saying, "You're throwing away happiness with both hands." And she really was. When he brought her here, she had a great life. She had 5 bratty kids, but she just couldn't handle it. It was a mental thing that she just couldn't handle. But I have to say, the older she got, well, the more times changed. She was better medicated. They had her on better medication, and she got better. She didn't fly into these horrible rages and grab knives and guns and chase us around the house. But I don't know. What else can I say?
But we had each other.
Yeah.
We
always had each other.
And you touched upon that. We do not feel like victims, and that which does not kill us can only make us stronger.
Stronger.
I have that in the front of the book, and words couldn't be more true.
And she has a question in the back there.
I just had 2 quick questions. One is whether or not you've ever contacted family relations in Germany, if you have made any connections at all.
I'll let Sylvia answer that. We were just asked if we've contacted our relatives in Germany.
I've been back to Germany twice. Excuse me, I've been back to Germany twice. Once when I was 21, and I got to meet the aunt and uncle that took care of my mother after she was in the orphanage. And even though I didn't speak very well German, the communication wasn't the best. And I also met Mari, which is my mistake. It's an aunt, not a cousin. Tanti Mari, and a couple of other cousins in there. But we never really discussed the relationship that my mother had. But when my grandfather came to the United States back in 80, do you remember when it was? No, it was
No,
the
it was
90s.
70s.
The 90s.
Oh, yeah.
When my grandfather came, my mother asked him, in German, of course, but I could pick up some of it. She says, "Why did you give me up for adoption?" And he could not give her an answer, and he would not give her an answer. And it destroyed the relationship once again, even though they tried to.
Do you know if he was in the military?
He was.
He was.
And
Yeah.
that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was rough. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
And did you have a 2-part question?
Oh,
Well, the only other question, kind of, I guess, is a moot point now, but I'm thinking of where your family was and your mom landing in Alamo. The whole time I was thinking, well, gosh, if they had lived in the city, in any neighborhood in the city, you would have had neighbors and so much more support and opportunities, especially if she didn't drive or couldn't drive. And I would think she'd be so isolated in Alamo, but it sounds as though it could have possibly been worse if she were in, more of a compact neighborhood with more eyes on her and more fear, and I don't know.
See, I kind of think a city would have been better for her. I think you can get lost in a city, and I think you can. She couldn't drive, so she would have been
Because
able
of her
to go
epilepsy.
to the bakery. She could have been able to. So I think I don't think Alamo helped. Yeah. Yep.
You said her father gave your mother up for adoption. Where was her mother?
They had again, we don't know exactly what happened in Germany before we were were born. But what we can understand is that our mom was born out of wedlock. And the war happened, and my mom's fraternal grandparents took care of her. So for 10 years, my mom lived with her dad's parents. And what she said, that things worked pretty well with them. They were older, but they took care of her. They loved her. But the war was still going on, and she would wake up in the middle of the night, and the air sirens would go off, and they would have to run for shelter. And we often wonder if that even brought on her epilepsy, that, the bombs and everything. And when my mother was about 10, her grandparents passed away. And that's when her life took, for the worst. And by then, her parents had married. They ended up marrying and having, three more kids?
Two more kids.
3.
Mariani came earlier.
I didn't even know that. And then what was so bizarre is that when our older brother Fred, he was in the service and he was stationed in Germany, and he looked up my mom's family while he was there. And so he kind of put the family back together, and we found out that my mom's sister was living, of all places, in Fort Wayne. I mean, I don't think we even knew she left Germany.
No, we knew she was in New York.
In New York, okay. But my mom, and she had not seen her sister, gosh, for how many years?
35 years, I think
35 years. And then she finds out her sister's in Fort Wayne, married with children. And so then we got together, and we became really close. It's just the war and everything that happened just tore up the whole family.
I know some of our kids went to Alamo
Yeah?
Elementary. Was it there then, or was it a one-room schoolhouse?
I went to the one-room schoolhouse.
I thought you said it
Oh,
was
no,
two
it was
room.
two. It was 2
Two-room
rooms.
schoolhouse.
I think it was kindergarten and first grade in one room, and then second and third in the other room. It's right near the four corners of Alamo, D Avenue and 6th Street,
Right behind the church.
kind of behind the church, yeah. And it used to be, I think, 2 floors.
No,
And there,
it's just one floor with a steeple.
part of it burned down, though,
Yeah.
like 20 years ago,
Yeah.
part of it burned. But yes, I was the last class in that school. And then they built the new Alamo Center School. Well, it was new, it was 60 years ago. The new school, 60 years ago.
And Sylvia and I went to the new,
Yeah.
the school that's currently there. Yeah.
And then did you go to high school and not see them?
Yep.
I think there was a question back here. Yeah.
My name's Kenny. I had the privilege of working in Alamo. I was a year older than Fred, and I knew the family. And I would suggest that for every yin, there's a yang. And I can remember seeing you guys. I worked at the gas station. Your dad would come into the gas station, and your family was always together. And I'm the last one of 7 kids, and there was always sibling rivalry. We wouldn't want to be seen. Specifically, my older brother wanted to be seen with a younger one. And your family always seemed like it was pretty close, and it appears as though that's not changed. And the aspect of the difficulties, I think, caused a union that had been better for you folks. I ran into you as a family one time in the grocery store in Cooper, and I said, "Hi, Mrs. Phillips," and she would have nothing to do with me. She said she didn't know me and don't talk to me, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
I was stunned. I was being friendly.
I'm sorry, she had a bad day.
Pardon?
That was one of her bad days.
Must have had a bad day.
The family was about maybe 15 feet away, and you acted as though nothing was wrong. And I never put it together because I didn't know, I worked there, and I knew most people in Alamo, but I didn't realize that your mom had an issue. I just thought it was a
Well, we tried to hide it because we were embarrassed. Kids are always embarrassed about what their parents do.
And I wanted
But
to thank you for specifically writing a book. It was a dream come true to listen to how your depiction of the winter and the Valley Fair is like reliving. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But it's like I said, our mom, I apologize if for anything
feel
she
bad.
did. But yeah, I'm sure we were horrified. And we would just kind of, when my mom would have one of her episodes, we just wanted to sink into the floor because we were just horrified.
And someone asked how we were as teenagers with her, and my response, I just didn't have friends over. Why subject our friends to that?
But
So
it
that's what I
some
took,
days,
the route I
Some
took.
days she was great, but we never, that's the thing, you never knew. We never knew what she would, when she would go off, what would set her off.
Any other questions?
Have you started having families of your own and getting together with her? What was that experience like for you?
Sylvia, yours is different, so do you want to start?
Yeah.
The lady was asking how we treated the relationship between our mother and our own children.
Since I was the rebel, it was always strained, and it remained strained for pretty much my entire adult life, with the exception of one time when I went to visit, and her total demeanor did a complete 180, and it was like, wow, I've got that mother I've never had before, and it lasted an instant, and the next time I visited, it was gone. So, but like I said, that was, these two took care of my mother because I really pushed that away. So
And it
these,
wasn't selfish. You
No.
did it for your
had
children.
it was,
family.
yeah, it was, I had a family, and she, actually, I remember her making the comment that she thought I was just playing house, that I really didn't want to be a mother or whatever. So that didn't help either, and I had other issues in there that came about, and it's like, I'm not subjecting my children to this. So the relationship was very strained. But these guys had a different picture.
But I probably shielded my children from our mother too. I remember my oldest son's first birthday. You have that traditional family gathering, and my mother caused a very big scene. And I vowed that she ruined so many of my holiday memories that she would never do that for my children's memories of their childhood. So while we took care of our mother, I kept them pretty separate because I felt I had to. That was important to me and my children. And you probably about the same thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
But when my father was 16 years older than my mother, so even when we were young, we knew he would probably go first, and he did, almost 16 years to the day. And when we were younger, we were so worried. We thought, what are we going to do when Bobby dies? We can't take care of Mutti. And it was scary to think about it. And we thought we'd probably have to have her committed or something because we couldn't take care of her. But as it turned out, by then our mother was on better medication, and Heidi and I kind of took over my mom's health when my dad passed away. And we moved, when my father died, within 1 week, we had her out of that house in Alamo and into an apartment in Kalamazoo.
A senior apartment.
Because we knew if she stepped 1 foot in that house, she would never leave. She would die there. And so we didn't ask her, we just did it. We moved everything out and we got her an apartment. And I got to tell you, she kind of blossomed.
She thrived
She really
for
did.
quite a few
For
years.
several years. She was very, very good. And we would take her to her doctor appointments. We made sure she took her medicine. Because if we didn't do it, who would? That was the whole thing. We did, she'd be on the streets probably. So we just felt the responsibility that we had to take care of her. And we did a damn good job. And she lived, about 16 years later. And as you can see from there's our mom with Heidi, it looks, and there's our parents. There's my mom and dad. She was quite the looker, don't you think? Yeah. And
Just
she,
that last picture that you pointed out, your brother Mickey
yep,
has a Boy Scout shirt on.
yeah. Mickey and Fred were both in the Boy Scouts, and I was in
Did your dad
4-H.
take part of that?
Pardon?
Did your dad take part in that?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, I remember going to the Grange with them, the Ashtimo Grange, for different things. And my dad had his hands full taking care of my mom. You know, even in school, going to parent-teacher conferences, they hardly ever went. They just didn't have time. He was a machinist. He worked nights at Eaton Transmission. And during the day, you know, he'd try to get in a few hours sleep and take care of my mom. He did all the cooking.
Did he work afternoons or midnights?
Midnight.
Overnights.
Yep, graveyard. He worked 11 to 7, I think. Yeah.
Any other? Yes.
Can you go through the pictures and kind of tell us why you chose the ones you did, or
I can't understand.
Go through the,
what's kind of going on, like, concern them, or?
Are you asking why we chose those photos, or?
Can you just go through them and kind of tell us a little bit about each one?
This is a Christmas photo.
What do you think? I'm probably about 5, right?
4 or
And
5.
that's Mickey on the far left, Hannah, my mother, and Sylvia. I was the little one in the corner. This is the Alamo Creamery. Those are the 100 people that it employed at the time.
Yeah.
the barn
That's our
is-
barn. It's on the corner of Hart Drive and 6th Street.
Part of the building is now gone. but you
Across-
can still see it.
My father,
Across
my
from the Calhaven
mother,
Trail.
and this is Tanta Lissy and Uncle Otto, and that's me. In my later hosen.
Which uncle lives that?
From Germany, yes. This is the Alamo Depot that our house is like right here. And this is, what's an Alamo? That's Fred, yeah. In the book, I talk about Hannah being born in Germany, but it was actually Fred. We wrote Fred out. And this is Sylvia with Uncle Otto and Tanta Lissy again. The two that, they were wonderful. They raised our mother. They were wonderful.
They saved her life,
Hannah at Lake Michigan, I believe it's South Haven.
probably.
And Mutti is what we called our mother. That's German for mother. And Bapi was German for father. And Hannah and Sylvia. And honest to God, that's the truth. There's 4 pictures in my baby album, and I'm not in one of them.
She was the 5th child.
To Guamanon Falls, went there every year. And this is Fred. I don't know, taken around 1950-ish, right?
Who's the one in the car?
53.
Mickey, yeah.
Oh, it's probably 50.
And this is a Thanksgiving. That's me in the middle. Sylvia looking at the camera. That's Fred
Is that Thanksgiving?
and Mickey with their backs, and Hannah. And our mother and father. And I think that's about it.
So how old was your mother when she actually married your father?
I think 21.
21, I think. it
Me and
was
my
too.
boys.
Yeah, 21, and he was 37. Yep.
Yes.
So your aunt and uncle, her aunt and uncle that raised her from Germany visited here, did she ever visit Germany? Your mother?
She never went back. I think she was afraid that if she went back to Germany that she would never come back.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and I think she was scared to go back. Did someone have a question back here?
Well, I was just trying to visualize the buildings in Alamo,
Mhm.
just over the trail, or just across the parking lot of the trail.
Yeah.
There is a green building. I always thought
That-
that was a depot. No.
That's our house. That was our house, the green building.
Okay, I thought that was the.
And the barn, the silver building next to it was our barn, is our
barn.
barn. It's not ours anymore. right, any other questions? Thank you so much for being a part of our story. Oh, you're so nice.
And please help yourself to the refreshments.
That's probably what she was gonna
And
say.
Heidi has some books for sale if you want to buy some.
Or if you have a book with you, I'll be glad to sign it.
Yes, she'll be happy to sign it.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming to this wonderful author talk with Heidi and our special guests, the Phillip sisters in Mass. So Hannah and Sylvia, we're so glad that you could be here this evening. So thank you. Definitely stop by the author table, especially if you have any further questions about the book, or buy a copy of the book yourself. And then we do have refreshments in the next room, so join us for those. If you came because you wanted to get a code for summer reading and you're participating in that program and you need that extra special code, I have those available by the front door. And if you're joining us online, message us on Facebook or send us an email. I'd be happy to get that to you. And please look for more author visits coming up later this year. We're hoping maybe late summer or fall to welcome a couple more authors to Portage District Library. So I hope you all come back for those visits. Thanks so much and enjoy your evening.